Woodstock police received information that 8 people aged 65 to 96 had been murdered at area nursing homes over a 7-year span. They're dealing with a serial killer.
Well, when I first started caring for her, she had quite the spirit. She was a very stubborn woman. And one evening I just got that red surging feeling that she was going to be the one. So I gave her insulin overdose. Afterwards I would hear like a laughter in my chest. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Absolutely not.
I've only ever had parking tickets. I've never been arrested for anything.
From what I can see here, there's 4 pages of a handwritten document. Is that your handwriting?
Yes, it is.
Okay, what brought you to that?
That's where things get a little crazy. I decided I didn't want to nurse anymore. I didn't want to hurt anybody anymore.
Right.
I honestly felt like God wanted to use me.
Did you have any feelings in your mind as far as knowing the difference between right and wrong?
Yes, I knew the difference between right and wrong. But I thought this was something that God or whoever wanted me to do.
Wetlaufer believes she's a chosen one, that God has chosen her to do important work, that God has identified who should die next. I think what that really is just good old-fashioned narcissism. It's making herself more important than she is as a person.
We never think of healthcare professionals to be the type of individuals that would consciously kill the people they're in charge of taking care of. So she's got that as a kind of interesting cover working for her.
So this is an excerpt from notes that Nurse Wetlaufer wrote. And she says, James was known for inappropriately touching the staff. That evening, I got the urge to overdose James. I was angry that he was so inappropriate. It comes across as very sterile clinical. It's as if James is a problem, James needs to die.
The first one that died as a result of what I did. He could be a bit of a handful. He would grab the nurse's breasts and buttocks, and he would say horribly inappropriate things about his wife, that now he was there, he was going to all of this stuff. But he did touch me inappropriately once.
And where was that?
On my breast.
Run me through.
About 9:30, I gave him a dose of 50 milligrams of insulin. Non-diabetic. So throughout the night he was yelling out, I love you and I'm sorry. Not to me, but just you could hear him calling out in his room, and that's what he was calling out.
Mm-hmm.
And then at 3:30 the doctor came in and said that his cause of death was from an embolism due to his post-hip.
It might be revenge killing because Wetlaufer talks about how James was inappropriate with the nursing staff.
But she's ignoring the fact of his condition. If he made a pass at her, that may have been the last straw. But the step into psychopathy is deciding to kill him for that behavior.
The family commended you for the work that you had done. And
Yes, and I've been there for him, yes.
how does that make you feel?
awful.
You indicated that he wasn't a very nice man.
No, he wasn't. I wonder if that's a portion of how I chose him. Afterwards, I did feel a release and a release. Like a release of pressure.
My guess is what she's feeling relief about is an internal sense of loathing. It's a sense of self-hate. It's a sense of rejection socially. To kill Silcox allows her to release that sense of conflict.
Rage usually starts early. She's probably slowly but surely since childhood been an angry person. And she finally found a place where she could safely enlist her predatory skills.
So I figured out I didn't want to do the family again.
How did you deal with it?
Take somebody to the computer and just try to forget about it. When my ex and I broke up in 2007, I was so angry. And it was like a voice said inside me, I'll use you. Don't worry about it. I just had a sense after my marriage broke up that God was going to use me for something.
Did you feel like you were doing the right thing for these people?
I felt like I was doing what I was supposed to do, but it wasn't what was right for them.
This is about her second victim. And it says, I was told by one of the nurses that Maurice had a bad habit of grabbing the staff's breasts and asses. One afternoon, I was working and I felt angry. There's anger that is triggered by something related to sex. It's not specific revenge on this patient, but he now represents something that she's going to eliminate. And so that triggers her psychopathic behavior.
He was another one who liked to grab breasts and asses. One afternoon I was working with him and he did grab me. And again, I got that feeling inside that this is his time to go. So I gave him an overdose of insulin after supper. And I believe he died the next day.
And how did it make you feel when Maurice passed away?
Loved it. I kept having a lot of guilt. A lot of guilt.
When Wetlaufer says, I felt a lot of guilt, it's not over the murder. She feels guilt because there's a conflict between the part of her that went into nursing to help people and the part of her that just took someone's life because she was angry at them.
It's also interesting that she uses the term ass. Ass is a vulgar word. There's a clue there. She doesn't really seem like she's socially adept or skilled with other people. People reveal themselves through the language they use.
There was a period of 3 years when I decided to stop killing.
What was going on in your life at that point?
I always was putting this pressure on myself to be a really good nurse and to do everything perfectly. And every once in a while, when I could give a hold of a hydromark or two and take it, then that pressure was gone.
Did you ever use that word?
Yes, probably once or twice a week.
Hydromorphone is an opiate. The choice to use an opiate and get high, I think, was a different direction of trying to get that same stimulation or thrill-seeking that she got from killing those 2 patients.
People think about opiates and morphine. If you think about something like heroin, there's a drug that can bind to receptors in your brain and give you a wonderful hit of opiates very, very quickly. Morphine binds to receptors in a slightly different way, not so gratifying, but prevents people from having withdrawal. And it still has the properties of giving people a sense of feeling high. It's in the right dose, it can be really hard to detect when people are on it. That's why it's a favorite drug of abuse, certainly even in hospital settings where people have access to it. People can remain reasonably alert while enjoying kind of a comfortable sense of being numb or high with it, while not looking drowsy or sleepy. So if you can figure out how to get it, most people can't tell you're on it.
What often happens on narcotics, your inhibitions are reduced to the place where some of those bad thoughts can come back. The more she does that, the more likely it is that the rage would reemerge.
She says Gladys had severe dementia and no longer talked. She was very stubborn and horribly difficult to give pills to. So her victim is a woman, in this case. We learned something new. Women are eligible to be killed.
Well, when I first started caring for her, she was walking and talking, and she had quite the spirit. She once punched a man because she overheard the nurses telling one of the gentlemen, "No, you can't push your wife around." And she turned around and she said, "You can't treat a woman like that." Boom!
And hit the man.
And hit the man. Eventually, she had dementia, didn't take her pills well, didn't eat well, very stubborn woman. And as always, one evening I just got that red surging feeling that she was going to be the one. And gave her insulin overdose.
After laying off killing for about 3 years, the bar seems lower for whom she's willing to kill. She's choosing the weakest and the most vulnerable to act this rage out on. These people can't fight back. They can't hurt her. Some of them can't even talk.
She celebrates this woman decking another guy. You can hear she laughs. She's invigorated by it. But then this woman that she can identify with now becomes a pain in the ass because she's demented and giving her a problem. This is where I think psychopathy becomes even more prominent. It doesn't matter now whether you're a man or a woman making sexual or non-sexual comments. The common denominator is you're irritating. And if you irritate her, she decides you gotta go.
Wettlaufer started to write poetry. Here is one of those poems. She watches some life drain from the notch in his neck vein. As it soothingly pools, it smothers her pain. Sweet stiletto, so sharp, craves another cut. I really see that as murdering people helps her feel better. And it makes me really wonder if there is some sadistic piece of her that enjoys watching them struggle.
Thomas just seemed to be waiting to die.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I had that feeling that, this is one.
Mm-hmm.
That night, she was very lucid.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about how much she liked blueberry pie and ice cream. So on my break, I went to Walmart. I got a small blueberry pie and some ice cream and brought it to her, and she ate 3 or 4 bites.
On the surface, it makes her look like the super nurse on the unit. But what we know is that she also knew that she was essentially giving her her last meal. And she had every intention of killing her later that night.
She didn't have to give her blueberry pie and ice cream, so she's playing with her. She delights in killing someone, and that's a very perverse delight.
I had that feeling that it was her time to go.
What do you mean by that? Do you think she was towards the end of her life at that
I
point?
know that she was the person to go to.
She wasn't combative.
No.
Where was that feeling?
In my chest area. After I did it, I got that laughter.
To actually state that she laughed out loud after killing her, I mean, what kind of person does that? The person didn't even annoy her.
She just gets this feeling very primitively in her chest. And if she has that feeling and she's around a particular individual, it seems like that's how it gets pegged.
She enjoys the high. She enjoys the power. This isn't about the patients at all at this point. Wettlaufer has discovered something about herself she didn't know. She enjoys killing.
This is an excerpt from the confession letter of Wettlaufer about Mary Zerowinski. Mary bugged me because she was outspoken and resistive to care. I was feeling very angry in general. She died the next afternoon. She's returned to some of the old playbook signals. If patient is annoying, patient's gotta go.
She inherited the nursing rent, and she was very outspoken and feisty. One night she said, you know, I'm going to die tonight. Why don't you get me into the deathbed so I can die? So I said, okay, well, let's put her inside the scare room if that's what you want. So we did, and then I thought, well, she must be the next one. So I gave her another death insulin. She became hiatus and she died.
And Mary ever trying to harm you or
No.
upset you in any way?
No. She was fun.
She was fun to work with, but she's also saying that Mary essentially gave her permission to kill her. The impulse control is very poor at this point.
Just because someone says, I want to die, doesn't mean you have permission to kill them or that you should kill them. But it enables her psychopathy in the sense that she doesn't even have to be annoyed. It's about revenge writ large, revenge about whatever happened to me in the past. I'm going to bite the world back. She's plotting everybody's murder while being sweet to them and taking care of them, and then ushers them right off to their death.
She's deciding the next stop and you're getting you out of here. Sure. There you go.
Which one has the vodka in it?
This is what she has to say about Maureen and killing her. Maureen had a lot of behaviors. She would hit other residents or pull their hair. Then I got the idea that if I could cause her some brain damage, she wouldn't be such a handful. Wettlaufer is changing her motivations for killing. Now, she's dealing with patients where she doesn't even feel the urge necessarily to kill them. She just wants to control the situation.
Eventually, it was decided that she needed a one-on-one staff. It was the role of the church nurse. That was nuts. She just got harder and harder to look after, and one night when I had to look after her, I started getting the feeling that surge again. If I could somehow give her enough of a dose to give her a coma or something to change her brain waves, maybe make her less mobile, less hard to do. So yeah, I overdosed her.
You remember how much insulin you gave to stick?
It was a lot. It was a lot. I'm going to say 80 long-acting and 60 short-acting, something like that. It was a lot of insulin.
Why so much, Trevor?
Wasn't sure she would die or not.
It's terrifying to think about a nurse doing that. Wetlaufer is making the decision to handle these patients as if they're objects. You really see an arrogance coming over Wetlaufer. Now it's just about making sure she doesn't experience stress.
She's not even saying it's a sign from God I should kill her. She's going, I just want to mutilate her brain so she stops being such a pain in the ass, which is hostile and aggressive. We are seeing this progression from killing men who are sexually aggressive and abusive. And then it progresses to general irritability. She then picks on a victim who is defenseless. This is psychopathy.
And I am sorry. I'm sorry for what the families went through at the time, and I'm extremely sorry for what they're going to go through. It's awful.
If you could say something to them, what would you say?
I'm sorry isn't enough. I honestly believed at the time that God wanted me to do it. But I know now that's not true.
You could have been in this situation and taken this to your grave.
I think I was told to do by a lawyer.
I pray for whoever I rob, if I shoot anybody, that they'll be quick and painless, free them from their body. I'm not harming them, because they're gone. Why and how did I become this person? Drugs, alcohol, no father, the influences, the rap music, the whole bad boy thing, all of it just conditioned me in the wrong way, and I have never gotten past being murderous.
Tell us about this ammo that's no longer manufactured. This box, this logo. We want to know all about that.
Lead Detective David Quinn let only Channel 2 Action News into the homicide unit to reveal the somewhat uncommon bullet that likely killed 2 homeless men just before Thanksgiving.
We have a particularly evil individual that has shot 2 of our homeless community in Atlanta in less than 3 miles away from each other.
Detectives are hoping these bullets will be the clue that connects them with the killer.
Take a good look at it. Okay. So, here's the deal. The only thing that was consistent with these 2 crime scenes, the one main thing, was the kind of bullets that were in their bodies. It's they say that this is the gun used. Are they gonna accuse me of it? It is an issue. The gun y'all found on me today, I bought it illegally because even though I'm a felon, I've always believed in the right to bear arms. All I'm trying to do is get back to this acting thing, make my dreams of being an actor come true, so I can provide some type of life for myself and my kids, and you bad before I die.
He was, in fact, a failed Hollywood actor, and the killings start after his final failure. So his grandiose narcissistic dreams are shattered. Murdering for him was to overcome the rage and upset that he had as a failed actor.
When Hollywood didn't work out for him, the need to have his 15 seconds of fame, I think, does play out in his decision to kill multiple people. Really what he craved wasn't necessarily to be an actor and to develop that craft, but it was really to be notorious.
American people love violence. Every time you turn the television on, murder, drugs, sex, Satanism, darkness is glorified. This is what we glorify. All it's doing is feeding that bloodlust right that I've had since I was 10. Basically, I suffer from bloodlust. But I want to do it again. You know what I'm saying?
How many do you think you spent all together?
1, 2, 3. And I robbed and I shot a lady in the cat the other night.
The other night?
It is 4. Number 1, I just wanted to kill somebody.
And what was the situation? Who is this person?
It starts with, I'm out, looking for somebody to rob. And then I take the money from Rob and put that towards my acting career. I'm still holding on to this dream. The sick part is turning from necessarily being about money to just killing.
When he kills, he realizes that this gives him so much pleasure, he's not interested in acting anymore. This gives him the thrill to replace the feeling of disappointment and rage at this other dream. But this is exciting. This is what he wants to do. It makes him feel big, because grandiosity is an important trait in psychopathy, and the ability to keep feeling powerful is part of narcissism.
My suspicion is that the more disenfranchised he became from his goals to be an actor, the more frustrated he became that he wasn't in control of his life. But instead of taking responsibility for choices he was making that were getting him farther and farther away from that goal, it was easier to be a victim. It's easier to take the perspective of, I've been given a raw deal. He failed to say, okay, what else can I do with my life if acting isn't going to work out? He really gave himself permission to act out. That level of narcissism is really common in psychopaths.
I look over there toward the shopping center and I see this guy out there. The entranceway of a store, there's a bank. I see that he's by himself. I went into this other place mentally, and my adrenaline's going. I'm outside of myself for a split second. Like something in me is pushing me. It's like something saying, do it. You know what I'm saying? Finish it. I get about this close to him, and then I do like that, right here. And what does he do that? Just like that. That's what he does. He does this when I'm doing. He does that. At the end or before you throw the trick? Before. Okay. He does that, and I don't even want to react it all the way, but he was like that, and I do pull the trick. So where's his body go down? He falls just like that, face down, real fast, just like that. And then I walk up to him like this. I still got my mask up, and then I shoot him in the back of the head, and then I shoot him in the back real fast. As I'm looking at the back of his head, I realize this homeless person.
The context in which he's a star is irrelevant, and so he reenacts the murder with glee. He's enjoying the fantasy of replaying the death. And it's absurd because he's enacting a brutal murder. This isn't stage and it isn't entertainment, but for him, it is.
I'm outside of myself right on this split second.
He said he's outside himself, feeling that something else is pushing him to action. There's not an ownership of his feeling and his volition. So there's a split. There's a world inside his head that's running the show that doesn't comport to reality. That's what I think makes him dangerous.
I walk over to make sure he's dead, and of course there's a pool of blood. Once the adrenaline comes down, then the remorse, the guilt, the why the did I just do that? That comes up, then the tears.
I wouldn't call it remorse because that realization doesn't change his future behavior. He doesn't go turn himself in. The feeling may be genuine, but it's not psychologically integrated into his sense of self.
There's a moment of remorse and guilt. It doesn't mean that psychopaths never feel remorse or never feel guilt. The issue is how brief it is, how shallow it is, and how quickly it's gone.
I just felt remorseful, man. But slowly, it starts to just go away. Okay. To where I just don't feel anything anymore. But I felt like after I did that to him, I'm through it. But something in me will not let me get rid of this gun. I saw him, I was just like, somebody's gonna die. And I was just a little mad and frustrated and just wanted to unleash anger, man. I was like, man, I'm doing this man a favor because human beings, we weren't meant to live like this. And I walk up, man, and I'm just like getting outside of myself while I'm harnessing on cold. And I walk up to him and bam, 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 5 times.
Presley is very much in his own gangster movie. He clearly wants to portray himself as a gangster, but he killed a defenseless person. That doesn't make him powerful, that makes him weak. But in his narcissistic, psychopathic narrative, it makes him all powerful.
Presley represents one of the most alarming kinds of cases of psychopathy. There's no recognition of the value of someone else's life. It's patients like this where you don't usually have a warning when they might be violent. He's scary.
I'm asking myself, what the did I just do? Why am I doing this? Why and how did I become this person? What is wrong with you? I get back to the house, even though I'm feeling remorseful, there's something about the power that this gun holds. I cannot let this gun go. Even though I'm sitting here and I got tears running down my eyes, at the same time I'm sitting here reloading.
I think Presley's giving us a compilation of movies and scenes that he's glorified over his years. I don't think he gave a whole lot of thought to reloading the weapon. I think he enjoyed the power. I think he enjoyed the adrenaline rush. We know with psychopaths that they don't experience the same normal range of emotions, highs or lows, that most of us do. And as a result, they sometimes crave a greater level of intensity to feel anything.
I wake up the next day and all of those feelings of remorse, they just kind of fade away. And it doesn't even come into my memory like most people be haunted. I don't feel the emotion that I'm supposed to feel. Killing a person ain't no different from killing a cockroach.
So, how did you arrive at Mr. Tommy Bennett?
So I'm watching American Dad. He's supposed to be like the government person that takes people out, right? And he's just talking about murdering and killing. So I could shoot somebody in the head and ordering a pizza. It triggered something in me. Being fed all these negative forces, the media, TV, the rap music, the negative, all these triggers going off in my brain just feeding my appetite to rob, feeding my appetite to be an outlaw, feeding my appetite to just kill.
Most of the science data about it tells us that children who are exposed to violence in pop culture, seeing violence in films or in cartoons, don't turn into violent members of society. What we're seeing in his murders is the playing out of the fantasy life that he's adopted for himself.
His inability to stay grounded and rooted in normal society well predates his observation of these shows and movies. Presley is somebody who was violent at a young age. His mother was scared of him. He had had run-ins with the law. There was a foundation that was broken already.
I load up at night. I'm looking for someone to hit. So, I'm walking. I'm out here as a wolf. I'm looking for a prey. So, I get to that bridge. Maybe it's somebody dying. On him, this is just about killing. I walk by and scope him. Like, he's laying this way, and the blanket is right here. I can see his face.
Oh, you can see his face?
Right. He looked like he was asleep. I'm premeditating, you know what I'm saying? I just take the gun out, and I had with both hands, I was like, boom, 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 like that. I started walking across the street, and he woke up. Who woke up? He woke up. I hear, oh, and it's like something in me ain't gonna be satisfied unless I know he's dead. It's almost like some satanic. I want another skull to add to my collection.
He's aware that his compulsion to kill is just overwhelming. He's also recognizing that, brutally wounding the guy wasn't enough. If he didn't die, he wouldn't be satisfied. He's really losing control. It's just been 3 days after his last kill. He's not able to contain his desires anymore. In a really grotesque way, it's about extinguishing and annihilating somebody's life.
And I was like, hey man, hey, you alright? I'm trying to see was he dead. He's doing this thing with his mouth like a fish out of water. And I just put the gun to his head. Boom! I saw that when that went in. I actually saw that open up. And when I saw that, I just left.
He's getting more bold in his need for a killing high. I think he was testing out the limits of what other aspects of murder could give him a high. Would seeing blood give him a high? Would seeing brain matter give him a high? For individuals who experience more sadistic interests, the idea of force or fear creating pain in their victims, suffering essentially, is something that is part of their arousal pattern.
This is the third time that he's enacting the moment of death, which means that he gets to explore his fantasies of being an actor in the most grotesque way imaginable, where he relives details of the death, including the really vivid and lurid details of how his victims die.
Describing him gasping and then shooting him again is very dispassionate and matter of fact and very callous. There isn't really an acknowledgement that it's another person, another human being. Anyone could be his victim in the way he thinks about people, which I think makes it even more horrifying.
I'm gonna tell you the truth, man. I'm gonna talk to you like I'm talking to my father that was never there. And I'm glad I can get this off my chest no matter what happens with my life after the day. I just feel like this whole world is really ran by killers. To make a long story short, I'm basically raised by the gang members in the neighborhood. I was shooting guns as early as 12 years old. I was doing cocaine, selling drugs as early as 12. Smoking cocaine, marijuana, drinking, all the gang members. This is what I've been conditioned to do my whole life. All the drugs, alcohol, no father, the influence, the rap music, the whole bad boy thing. This country being built on blood, the history of America, just all of this just conditioned me in the wrong way, and I have never gotten past being murderous.
Presley's reality is a little different than his narrative. While he may have grown up in impoverished circumstances, he had a mother that was very involved. His mother moved him to a much more affluent school system so that he would be away from those influences, and by all accounts, he started to get his life in order. So much so that he was actually interviewed as a teenager about his former life in a gang. But Presley is wired differently than many of us, and unfortunately, he enjoyed that high, that thrill, and that power, and that's where we have these series of people that he's killed.
Externalizing all blame is something that psychopaths do. They'll acknowledge their role in the actions, but they really will feel that society is to blame. He views whatever he does as being caused by something outside of his control and beyond him, which means a very good place for him is in prison.
I get off on it, but not harming no women and no children. Now, so this is the first woman that I shot.
Well, what happened? Set it up for me. What it look like? Where was it?
On the Decatur train station. This was all about robbery. This was all about money. I'm gonna tell her what it's honest. You know what? I did just take 3 of my brother's lives. I like I'm gonna go with the white that they took everything from us in slavery. I'm like, everything been taken from me. So I'm gonna take back. Lo and behold, here comes this white lady walking. She goes down that alley. And in my mind, I'm like, perfect, because she by herself.
Did she see you?
She saw me. When I walked in the alley, she pulls out a little knife. She was like, what do you want? That's when I pulled the gun out. I was like, lay down before I shoot you. And she's like, okay. Then she dropped the knife. I told her, get down on the ground before I shoot you. She listened to me. So I'm like, give me your wallet. She gives me the wallet, and as soon as she gives me the wallet, I just go boom. When I hit her, she falls back, and she just starts screaming, oh my God, 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 oh my God. And then I just heard her start screaming, oh my God.
The robbery was an incidental part of his narrative. His goal was to kill again. He broke his own rules and boundaries by killing a woman when he swore that he would never kill a woman or children. Presley became addicted to the power, the control, the ability to decide when and how somebody would die.
Not harming no women and no children. No.
In the big picture of his perspective, we see that non sequitur between I'd never hurt women and children to murdering a woman. I don't think he sees any contradiction in that because she represents, I think, just now the new class of targets, which just have to be white.
His pleasure comes from annihilating a life. So the question is, why does he get so thrilled when he kills? The contrast between his humdrum, low-feeling life and the moment of killing is very dramatic, and that's what creates addiction.
I put the wallet in this side, and then I just walk off. I'm like, oh man, they shoot. I'm acting now, I'm playing a role. Number 1, number 2 here, rest in peace. Number 3 over there, I'm sorry. But after her, I start to be like, it's got to be over. And I had purpose in my mind that all I was going to do was start working as an actor.
This really captures the fantasy world that Presley lives in, where he is acknowledging that he's playing a part. He's acting as if it is a film and the camera can just be turned off, the set dismantled, and everybody will just go back about their business, not really recognizing these are real human beings he killed. He's literally in a movie set or on a movie set in his head.
He's starting to feel like he's a superstar. There's the catharsis, and then this cooling off period where you're fantasizing about it, and then the compulsion starts again. There is no doubt in my mind he would have kept killing.
So I get back to the apartment. I open the wine. And
May 23rd, 2024. For most people in Dunedin, it was just another Thursday. The kind of afternoon that slips quietly into memory without asking for attention. Students drifted through the city centre after school. Buses arrived and departed in their endless rhythm. Shop windows reflected the fading daylight. Conversations floated through the air and disappeared just as quickly. Nothing about that afternoon seemed destined for headlines. Nothing about it looked like the beginning of a tragedy. And yet, somewhere among the crowds moving through the central bus hub on Great King Street, a chain of decisions had already begun. Tiny decisions. Ordinary decisions. The kind that seem meaningless in the moment. A glance. A word. A challenge. A step forward instead of backward. The distance between life and death is often imagined as something dramatic. A gunshot in a dark alley. A masked stranger lurking in the shadows. A carefully planned act of violence. Reality is usually far less cinematic. Sometimes the distance between life and death is measured in seconds. Sometimes it is measured in a single heartbeat. And sometimes it is measured in the length of a knife hidden beneath a teenager's clothing. By the time emergency crews arrived at the Dunedin bus hub, panic had already begun spreading through the crowd. Students were running. Others stood frozen. Some were crying. Many simply stared. The scene unfolding before them was something they would replay in their minds for years. A teenage boy lay wounded. People rushed to help. Voices shouted over one another. Someone called emergency services. Someone else tried to make sense of what they had just witnessed. But no amount of confusion could change one brutal fact. A young life was slipping away. Hours earlier, nobody standing at that bus stop could have imagined that one student would never return home. Nobody knew that parents would soon receive the kind of phone call every parent fears. Nobody knew that a school community would be shattered. Nobody knew that a city would soon find itself asking a question that seemed impossible to answer. How had two children become part of a homicide case? Because that was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this story. Not the violence. Not the courtroom battles that would follow. Not even the knife itself. It was the age of the people involved. The victim was a teenager. The person responsible was even younger. When the news began spreading across New Zealand, disbelief followed almost immediately. A 13-year-old. The number felt unreal. Too young to drive. Too young to vote. Too young to leave school. Yet somehow old enough to stand accused of taking another person's life. The details shocked a nation. The debates began almost instantly. Some people asked whether the act was intentional. Others focused on self-defense. Some blamed youth violence. Others pointed toward deeper social problems. Politicians spoke. Commentators argued. News reports multiplied. But beneath every headline and every legal argument stood a painful reality that could never be ignored. A 16-year-old boy named Enere Tana McLaren was dead. For his family, there would be no debate capable of changing that truth. No court ruling could reverse it. No sentence could erase it. No explanation could bring him back. The world often experiences true crime through distance. Through screens. Through newspaper articles. Through podcasts listened to during long drives. Cases become stories. Names become headlines. Victims become statistics. But tragedy does not feel distant to the people living inside it. For them, tragedy is intensely personal. It arrives in hospital corridors. It waits beside silent telephones. It sits at dinner tables where one chair suddenly remains empty. It follows families home after funerals. It lingers in bedrooms left untouched. And it echoes through years that continue moving forward despite everything. Long before investigators examined evidence. Long before lawyers stood before juries. Long before television cameras gathered outside courthouses. There was simply a family facing the unimaginable. A son who would never walk through the front door again. A future that disappeared in a matter of moments. A life interrupted before it truly had the chance to begin. The city of Dunedin has long been known for its beauty. Rolling hills. Historic buildings. A strong student culture. The ocean never far away. To visitors, it appears peaceful. Predictable. Safe. The sort of place where serious violence feels like something that happens elsewhere. Yet every community carries hidden tensions beneath the surface. Every city contains stories that never make national news. Every generation confronts its own fears about the future. In recent years, concerns about youth violence had quietly grown across parts of New Zealand. Teachers noticed changes. Parents worried. Police discussed troubling incidents. Most of those stories never attracted widespread attention. Until one afternoon changed everything. What happened at the bus hub was over quickly. Violence often is. Movies teach us that major events unfold slowly. Reality rarely grants such luxury. The moments that alter lives forever are usually sudden. A confrontation begins. Emotions rise. Choices narrow. And then, before anyone fully understands what is happening, the damage is done. Witnesses would later attempt to reconstruct those moments. Investigators would examine movements frame by frame. Lawyers would argue over intentions. Jurors would weigh competing versions of events. Yet no matter how carefully the incident was analyzed, one truth remained frustratingly simple. A confrontation that should have ended with words ended with a death. That fact would become the center of everything. The investigation. The trial. The public conversation. The grief. The questions. Especially the questions. Why was a knife present? What happened in the seconds leading up to the stabbing? Who escalated the conflict? Could it have been prevented? Was it murder? Was it self-defense? Was it something that existed somewhere between those two explanations? As months passed, answers emerged slowly. Some satisfied the public. Others created even more uncertainty. Courtrooms are designed to determine legal responsibility. They are far less capable of providing emotional closure. Sometimes a verdict ends a case. Sometimes it only deepens the tragedy. This would become one of those cases. Because at its heart, this story is not merely about crime. It is about adolescence. It is about impulsive decisions. It is about anger colliding with fear. It is about the fragile boundary separating confrontation from catastrophe. Most importantly, it is about consequences. The kind of consequences that last far longer than the moments that create them. Somewhere in Dunedin today, buses still arrive at the central hub. Students still gather after school. People still check their phones while waiting for rides home. The city continues moving forward. Cities always do. But places remember. Even when crowds change. Even when headlines fade. Even when years pass. Certain locations become tied forever to moments that altered lives. For some people, Great King Street will always carry that memory. A memory of sirens. A memory of confusion. A memory of a young boy fighting for his life. And a memory of another young boy whose actions would change countless lives, including his own. This is the story of what happened that afternoon. The story of Tana McLaren. The story of a fatal confrontation between two teenagers. The story of an investigation that forced an entire nation to confront uncomfortable questions about youth violence, accountability, and loss. And perhaps most haunting of all, it is the story of how a few irreversible seconds can cast a shadow over decades. Because before the court documents, before the verdict, before the sentence, before the arguments, there was simply an ordinary afternoon. An ordinary bus stop. Two teenagers. And a moment from which nobody would ever truly recover. To understand what happened on May 23, 2024, you first have to understand the place where it happened. Because crimes do not occur inside a vacuum. Every tragedy unfolds somewhere. Every story belongs to a landscape. Every act of violence leaves its mark upon a location that existed long before the crime and continues existing long after it. In this case, that place was Dunedin, a city resting on the southeastern coast of New Zealand's South Island. At first glance, Dunedin does not look like the setting for a homicide that would shock an entire country. It is not a sprawling metropolis dominated by endless concrete. It is not a city known internationally for violent crime. It does not carry the reputation of danger that often accompanies urban crime stories. Instead, Dunedin feels quieter, older, more intimate. The city sits between rolling hills and the cold waters of the Pacific Ocean. Victorian architecture lines many of its streets. Historic stone buildings stand beside modern businesses. Students move through the city in large numbers, giving the area a youthful energy that shapes much of daily life. For decades, Dunedin has been known as a university city. Education forms part of its identity. Young people are everywhere. Students walking to class. Students waiting for buses. Students crowding cafes. Students filling public spaces with conversation and laughter. In many ways, youth is woven directly into the city's character. That reality makes what happened in May of 2024 all the more unsettling. Because the tragedy did not emerge from the margins of society. It emerged from its center. From a place filled with young people. A place designed to move them safely from one part of the city to another. A place where parents expected their children to be protected. The Dunedin bus hub had become one of the busiest transportation points in the city. Located near Great King Street, it served as a daily crossroads. Every afternoon, hundreds of students passed through it. School bags. Sports uniforms. Phones in hand. Conversations about homework. Weekend plans. Upcoming exams. The ordinary concerns of teenage life. For many students, the bus hub represented freedom. The transition between school and home. The moment the final bell rang and responsibility loosened its grip. A place where friends gathered before heading in different directions. A place where social groups formed and dissolved. A place where rumors traveled quickly. Where arguments occasionally began. Where friendships strengthened. Where rivalries sometimes simmered beneath the surface. Most days, these interactions remained harmless. Teenagers being teenagers. Testing boundaries. Showing off. Seeking approval. Trying to establish identity in a world that often feels confusing. Adults frequently forget how emotionally intense adolescence can be. The smallest slight can feel enormous. A disrespectful comment can linger for days. A challenge to one's reputation can feel impossible to ignore. The teenage brain is still developing. Emotional responses often arrive faster than rational thought. Impulses sometimes overpower judgment. Most young people navigate these years successfully. But occasionally, under the wrong circumstances, emotions collide with consequences in devastating ways. By 2024, concerns about youth behavior had become an increasingly common topic throughout parts of New Zealand. Teachers spoke about growing tensions among some students. Parents worried about online conflicts spilling into real life. Police monitored incidents involving young offenders. Community leaders debated how best to address the challenges facing modern teenagers. Many factors contributed to these discussions. Social media amplified conflicts. Arguments no longer ended when students left school grounds. Disagreements could continue online for hours. Humiliation could spread instantly. Peer pressure evolved into something more powerful than previous generations had experienced. A single confrontation could attract an audience of hundreds. Reputation became currency. Image became everything. For teenagers struggling to define themselves, these pressures could feel overwhelming. Yet despite these concerns, few people expected an event like the one that would soon unfold. Because statistics often create a false sense of distance. People read about violence elsewhere. In other cities. Other countries. Other communities. The assumption is simple. That kind of thing happened somewhere else. Not here. Not to us. Not to our children. Not at our bus stop. Not on our street. Not in broad daylight. The illusion of safety is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. Until the moment it breaks. On the morning of May 23rd, nobody walking through central Dunedin knew they were moving toward a day that would soon dominate national headlines. The city woke as it always did. Businesses opened their doors. Teachers prepared lessons. Students attended classes. Parents went to work. Traffic moved through the streets. The routines of ordinary life continued uninterrupted. Weather reports from that period described the late autumn conditions familiar to southern New Zealand. The air carried a chill. Clouds drifted overhead. The sun appeared only occasionally through gaps in the grey sky. The season itself seemed to be shifting. Summer had long disappeared. Winter waited just beyond the horizon. People wore jackets. Hands disappeared into pockets. Breath occasionally lingered in the cool air. Nothing about the day appeared remarkable. And perhaps that is what makes stories like this so haunting. The absence of warning. The absence of visible signs. The inability to identify the exact moment when normal life quietly begins transforming into something else. Somewhere across the city that day, students sat in classrooms counting the minutes until school ended. Some worried about assignments. Others thought about sports practice. Some planned to meet friends after class. Most could not imagine that by evening, everyone would be talking about a fatal stabbing. At Trinity Catholic College, where Enere Tana McLaren studied, the day unfolded much like any other. Class schedules continued. Teachers taught lessons. Students moved between classrooms. The future still appeared open. Possibilities still stretched ahead. Nobody knew how quickly that future would change. Schools are fascinating places when viewed through the lens of tragedy. After a major incident, every memory acquires new meaning. Every interaction becomes significant. People revisit conversations. Replay encounters. Search for clues hidden inside ordinary moments. The laughter in hallways. The greetings exchanged between friends. The plans made for tomorrow. All of them become frozen in time. Suddenly precious. Suddenly painful. Because once someone is gone, even the smallest memory gains enormous value. Across Dunedin that afternoon, students eventually began leaving school grounds. Backpacks slung over shoulders. Groups gathering on sidewalks. The familiar migration toward buses and transportation routes began. This ritual occurred every weekday. So regularly that few people paid attention to it. But that day would be different. Unbeknownst to nearly everyone involved, separate paths were already converging. Individuals who would soon become connected by tragedy moved through the city completely unaware of what lay ahead. That is another cruel aspect of real-life crime. The future arrives without announcement. There are no dramatic musical cues. No warnings. No visible countdown clocks. Life simply continues until suddenly it does not. The bus hub itself embodied movement. People arriving. People leaving. The constant exchange of human lives intersecting briefly before continuing onward. Students occupied benches. Others stood beneath shelters. Drivers followed schedules. Passengers checked arrival times. The environment was familiar to everyone who used it. Predictable. Routine. Comforting in its repetition. Yet public spaces possess a strange duality. They belong to everyone. And because they belong to everyone, they can also become stages for unexpected conflict. A disagreement that might have ended quietly elsewhere can become something larger when surrounded by peers. Teenagers are particularly vulnerable to this dynamic. Audience changes behavior. Witnesses create pressure. Pride becomes difficult to abandon. Backing down becomes harder. Saving face becomes a priority. Psychologists have long understood that adolescents often take greater risks when surrounded by peers. The presence of observers can transform decision-making. Actions become performances. Emotions become amplified. Consequences become secondary. These truths would later hang heavily over discussions surrounding the Jundin case. Because at its core, the tragedy was not merely about one moment. It was about everything that existed before that moment. The environment. The pressures. The choices. The emotions. The culture surrounding modern adolescence. The city itself would soon find itself confronting difficult questions. Questions without easy answers. How does a 13-year-old come to carry a knife? What social forces contribute to such decisions? Could intervention have occurred earlier? Could warning signs have been recognized? Could the outcome have been prevented? These questions would dominate conversations for months. But on the afternoon of May 23rd, none of them had yet been asked. The city still existed in a state of innocence. The people walking through the bus hub still believed they were participating in an ordinary day. Parents expected children to come home. Students expected to board buses. Teachers expected to see their classes again tomorrow. The future still appeared predictable. Stable. Safe. Yet beneath the surface of ordinary life, the conditions for tragedy were quietly assembling themselves. Not through grand conspiracy. Not through elaborate planning. But through something far more common. Human behavior. Human emotion. Human error. The same forces that have shaped countless tragedies throughout history. As afternoon moved toward evening, shadows gradually lengthened across the city. Traffic continued flowing through Great King Street. Students continued gathering around the transportation hub. Voices echoed beneath shelters. Footsteps crossed pavement. The city carried on exactly as it had the day before and the day before that. No one knew that within a short period of time, police vehicles would race toward the area. No one knew emergency responders would soon fight to save a young life. No one knew that television crews would eventually arrive. No one knew that a courtroom battle would stretch into the following year. And no one knew that the name Enere Tanamaclaren would soon be spoken across New Zealand. For now, Dunedin remained exactly what it had always been. A coastal city. A student city. A community built around young people chasing futures that still seemed endless. A place filled with ordinary routines. Ordinary hopes. Ordinary dreams. And like so many places touched by tragedy, it stood unknowingly on the edge of a moment that would divide its story into two chapters. Before. And after. Before he became a headline, before court documents recorded his name, before journalists summarized his life in a few brief paragraphs, Enere Tanamaclaren was simply a teenager. A son. A friend. A classmate. A young man standing at the beginning of his story rather than near its end. That is one of the tragedies hidden inside nearly every true crime case. The public often learns about victims through the circumstances of their deaths rather than the details of their lives. The violence becomes famous. The person does not. People remember the crime. They forget the laughter. They remember the courtroom. They forget the dreams. They remember the final day. They forget all the ordinary days that came before it. Yet those ordinary days are where a life truly exists. For 16 years, NRA's world had been filled with the same things that shape most teenagers. School. Family. Friends. Plans for the future. Small victories. Occasional disappointments. Moments that seemed insignificant at the time but would later become priceless memories for the people who loved him. Like most young people, he occupied a stage of life defined by possibility. At 16, the future feels endless. The road ahead stretches so far that few teenagers spend much time thinking about where it ends. They think about next week, the next school holiday, the next sports event, the next weekend, the next conversation, the next opportunity. Death belongs to other people. Older people. People in movies. People in history books. Not someone sitting beside you in class. Not someone laughing with friends after school. Not someone planning what they might do next year. The cruelty of NRA's story lies partly in that reality. His life was still in the process of becoming. There were chapters unwritten. Experiences waiting ahead. Milestones he never had the chance to reach. When educators at Trinity Catholic College spoke about him after his death, they described a student with energy and promise. The words may sound simple, but those who work with young people understand their meaning. Schools witness thousands of students pass through their hallways. Teachers learn quickly which students disappear into the background and which students leave an impression. Not because they are perfect. Not because they never make mistakes. But because they possess something difficult to define. A presence. An energy. A spark. The kind of quality that makes people remember them. The kind of quality that causes an empty desk to feel noticeably different from every other empty desk. In the days following the tragedy, classmates struggled to process what had happened. One day a person exists within the rhythm of everyday life. The next day they do not. The transition is so sudden that the human mind resists accepting it. Friends continue expecting messages that never arrive. They imagine seeing the person around the next corner. They glance toward familiar places before remembering. Again and again. The realization repeats itself. Each repetition hurts. Grief rarely arrives all at once. It comes in waves. For teenagers, those waves can be especially confusing. Most adolescents have little experience with death. They understand it intellectually. They know what it means. But understanding and experiencing are entirely different things. The death of a peer introduces a terrifying truth. Life is not guaranteed. Youth offers no protection. Tomorrow is not promised. For many of NRA's classmates, that realization arrived much sooner than it should have. The image of a young life interrupted became impossible to ignore. Imagine an ordinary school day before May 23rd. Students entering classrooms. Teachers taking attendance. Friends exchanging jokes. The simple comfort of routine. Somewhere among them is NRA. Perhaps talking with friends. Perhaps thinking about assignments. Perhaps planning something for the weekend. The details of those moments may never be fully known. What matters is that they existed. The final day of a person's life almost never announces itself as special. There is no sign hanging in the sky. No warning. No indication that mundane activities are quietly becoming final memories. The last greeting. The last laugh. The last message. The last walk home. The last conversation with a friend. These moments reveal their significance only afterward. Only when it is too late. For Eneray's family, the loss extended far beyond the public narrative. The news reports focused on the stabbing, the legal proceedings, the age of the offender, the national debate. Families experience something entirely different. They experience absence. The absence that appears in countless forms. An empty bedroom. An unused chair. A silence where a familiar voice once existed. The world continues moving forward while grief remains stubbornly fixed in place. Birthdays arrive. Holidays arrive. School years end. Seasons change. Yet the person who should be present remains missing from all of it. Every family touched by homicide learns this painful lesson. The crime itself occupies only a moment. The consequences last forever. The public often measures tragedy through statistics. One victim. One arrest. One trial. One sentence. Families measure tragedy differently. They measure it through anniversaries. Missed opportunities. Future moments that never happen. The graduation not attended. The career never pursued. The relationships never formed. The life that existed only as potential. When discussing victims, it is important to resist the temptation to transform them into symbols. Eneray was not simply a representative of youth violence. He was not merely a case study. He was not just a name attached to a national conversation. He was a human being. A teenager with strengths and flaws. A person whose identity extended far beyond the circumstances of his death. That distinction matters. Because true crime sometimes creates an unintended distortion. The victim becomes trapped inside the final chapter of their story. Everything before that chapter fades into the background. But people are more than the worst thing that ever happened to them. The people who knew Eneray would have understood that instinctively. Their memories were not limited to one terrible afternoon. They included years. Shared experiences. Conversations. Moments that never appeared in newspapers. The private memories that belong only to those closest to him. In many ways, memory becomes an act of resistance after a tragedy. A refusal to allow violence to define a life completely. A refusal to let a final moment overshadow everything that came before it. Friends remember jokes. Teachers remember effort. Family members remember affection. Each memory pushes back against reduction. Each memory insists that a life contained more than a headline. As the case gained national attention, countless people who had never met Eneray formed opinions about what happened. They debated responsibility, motivation, self-defense, punishment. These discussions were inevitable. They were also incomplete. Because while society argued over legal questions, a family continued mourning a son. The emotional realities of homicide often exist separately from the legal process. Courts seek facts. Families seek understanding. Courts determine responsibility. Families confront loss. The two journeys overlap but are never identical. Even the most thorough investigation cannot answer every question grief creates. Why him? Why then? Why did a confrontation escalate? Why couldn't someone stop it? Why was a weapon present? Why did everything unfold the way it did? These questions haunt families because many lack satisfying answers. Human beings crave meaning. Tragedy frequently refuses to provide it. The story of Eneray Tana McLaren forces us to confront another uncomfortable truth about adolescence. Teenagers often exist in a strange space between childhood and adulthood. Society expects them to make responsible decisions. Yet their understanding of consequences is still developing. They possess independence but not complete maturity. Freedom but not complete wisdom. Potential but not complete perspective. This stage of life is supposed to involve mistakes. Embarrassing mistakes. Harmless mistakes. The kind people laugh about years later. Not fatal mistakes. Not irreversible consequences. Not outcomes measured in funerals and courtrooms. That reality makes the loss feel especially profound. When an elderly person dies, grief is often intertwined with a recognition that a full life has been lived. When a teenager dies, grief carries a different weight. The dominant feeling becomes interruption. Potential interrupted. Growth interrupted. Life interrupted. A story ending before its central chapters have even begun. By every account available publicly, NRA possessed the same thing every 16-year-old possesses. A future. Not a guaranteed future. No such thing exists. But a future filled with possibilities. Paths not yet chosen. Dreams not yet tested. Experiences not yet lived. The tragedy of May 23 did not merely take a life. It erased those possibilities. And that is why stories like this continue resonating long after court proceedings conclude. Because beneath the legal language and public debate lies something universally understood. The loss of a young person feels fundamentally wrong. It violates expectations. It challenges assumptions. It reminds us how fragile life can be. In the weeks following NRA's death, members of the community gathered to mourn. Schools offered support. Friends leaned on one another. Teachers attempted to guide students through emotions many were encountering for the first time. The process was imperfect. Grief always is. Some people cried openly. Others withdrew into silence. Some wanted answers immediately. Others avoided discussing the event altogether. There is no correct way to process loss. There is only the difficult task of carrying it. For the students who knew NRA, the world after May 23 would never look exactly the same. Certain places would forever trigger memories. Certain dates would remain significant. Certain conversations would become impossible to forget. This is the hidden legacy of violence. Its impact extends outward in widening circles. Family. Friends. Classmates. Teachers. Community members. Each person carrying a different piece of the loss. Each person remembering a different version of the same young man. And at the center of all those memories remains the person himself. Not the victim. Not the headline. Not the case. But NRA Tana McLaren. A 16-year-old student. A young man remembered by those who knew him. A life filled with promise. A future still unfolding. And a story that should have continued far beyond a single afternoon in May. The final hours of May 23, 2024, did not begin as a crisis. They began the way countless afternoons begin in cities around the world. School had ended. Students were making their way through Juneteenth. The routines of the day were winding down. People were thinking about dinner, homework, sports practice, family plans, and the familiar comforts waiting for them at home. The central bus hub on Great King Street was doing what it was designed to do. Moving people. Connecting neighborhoods. Serving as a meeting point for hundreds of students passing through the city. For years, the location had been part of everyday life. A place of arrivals and departures. A place where conversation started and ended. A place where teenagers gathered after school before heading in different directions. Nothing about the setting suggested that it would soon become the scene of a fatal confrontation. Yet tragedy rarely announces itself. It often arrives disguised as something small. An argument. A misunderstanding. A challenge. A moment of anger. A refusal to walk away. What happened that afternoon would later be examined in extraordinary detail. Investigators would study witness statements. Lawyers would reconstruct timelines. Jurors would hear competing interpretations of the same event. Every movement would matter. Every decision would be scrutinized. Every second would be weighed against the devastating outcome that followed. But in the moment itself, none of the people present could see the larger story unfolding around them. They saw only fragments. A confrontation. A gathering of attention. A situation becoming increasingly tense. The public record establishes that a conflict developed between Enere McLaren and a 13-year-old boy whose identity remains legally protected because of his age. Both were young. Both were still navigating the complicated and often volatile landscape of adolescence. Whatever tensions existed before that encounter, whatever emotions were present, whatever thoughts moved through their minds, they would ultimately converge at a single point in time. One location. One confrontation. One irreversible outcome. The bus hub was not empty. People were nearby. Students moved through the area. Witnesses would later become crucial to understanding what had happened. Yet one of the most unsettling aspects of public violence is how quickly it unfolds. Observers often have little time to react. Events accelerate. Adrenaline floods the body. Confusion takes over. People struggle to process what they are seeing until it is already over. At some point during the confrontation, the situation crossed a threshold. What should have remained a conflict became something far more serious. What should have ended with words became physical. And within moments, a knife entered the story. A knife. Such a simple object. A piece of metal. Small enough to conceal. Small enough to carry unnoticed. Yet capable of changing countless lives in seconds. Later court proceedings would reveal that the younger boy had been carrying the weapon. The presence of that knife would become one of the most significant facts in the entire case. Because once a weapon enters a confrontation, the stakes change instantly. The margin for error disappears. Impulsive decisions become deadly. A few seconds of emotion can create consequences that last forever. The confrontation escalated. Then came the act that would alter everything. Enere McLaren was stabbed. In countless crime stories, violence is often dramatized. Movies stretch moments into elaborate sequences. Television turns tragedy into spectacle. Reality is different. Reality is abrupt. Reality is chaotic. Reality leaves people struggling to understand what they have just witnessed. One moment, a teenager is standing among a crowd. The next, he is gravely injured. The transition can be almost impossible for the human mind to comprehend. Witnesses later described scenes of panic and confusion. Students who moments earlier had been focused on ordinary concerns suddenly found themselves confronting a medical emergency. People began reacting instinctively. Some moved toward the victim. Others froze. Some backed away in shock. Others searched for help. The atmosphere changed completely. The casual rhythm of the bus hub vanished. Fear took its place. In emergencies, time begins to behave strangely. For some people, everything seems to happen at once. For others, every second feels stretched. Moments become fragmented. Memories become incomplete. Individuals remember different details. Different sounds. Different images. Different emotions. Yet everyone understands the same thing. Something terrible has happened. Emergency services were contacted. Help was on the way. But severe injuries do not pause while responders travel. The human body continues fighting. Every second matters. Every decision matters. Every effort matters. Somewhere amid the confusion, people attempted to assist. Others watched helplessly. The scene unfolding before them was far removed from anything they had expected to encounter after school that day. This was not supposed to happen here. Not at a bus stop. Not in broad daylight. Not among teenagers. Not in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. And yet it was happening. The reality could not be ignored. A young man had suffered a life-threatening injury. The atmosphere of routine had been replaced by urgency. The atmosphere of safety had been replaced by uncertainty. The atmosphere of youth had been replaced by mortality. Soon emergency responders arrived. Professionals trained to deal with crisis stepped into a situation already marked by fear and confusion. Their focus was singular. Save a life. Nothing else mattered. Not questions. Not blame. Not future court proceedings. Only survival. The efforts to help NRA began immediately. But some injuries create battles that medicine cannot always win. Even with skilled responders. Even with rapid intervention. Even with determination and urgency. The outcome is not always within human control. As emergency personnel worked, the wider reality of the situation began spreading outward. Witnesses contacted friends. Messages moved across phones. Rumors traveled through social circles. Information spread faster than confirmation. Fragments became stories. Stories became speculation. People began asking what had happened. No one yet knew how devastating the answer would be. Meanwhile, police were beginning their own response. A violent incident involving young people immediately raises critical questions. Who was involved? What exactly occurred? Where was the weapon? Were there additional threats? Were witnesses safe? Investigators would soon begin assembling the puzzle. But at that stage, the priority remained immediate. Secure the scene. Protect evidence. Understand the basic facts. And perhaps most importantly, determine whether the victim would survive. For a period of time, uncertainty dominated everything. Families waited. Friends waited. Teachers waited. The community waited. Hope and fear existed side by side. In hospitals around the world, similar moments unfold every day. Doctors work. Families pray. Time slows. People cling to optimism because the alternative is too painful to contemplate. Yet not every battle ends in recovery. Not every patient returns home. Not every story receives the ending people desperately want. Despite efforts to save him, Enre Tana McLaren died from his injuries. He was 16 years old. That single fact transformed the incident from a serious assault into a homicide investigation. The stakes changed instantly. The emotional weight changed instantly. The legal implications changed instantly. A confrontation between teenagers had resulted in the loss of a human life. The consequences would extend far beyond the bus hub. Far beyond that afternoon. Far beyond Dunedin itself. For NRA's family, the world divided into before and after. Before the phone call. After the phone call. Before the loss. After the loss. The details of private grief often remain hidden from public view, and rightly so. But anyone who has experienced sudden loss understands its power. The disbelief. The shock. The desperate wish that reality might somehow be mistaken. The realization that it is not. Somewhere else, another family was also facing a reality that would permanently alter their future. A 13-year-old boy had become the central figure in a homicide investigation. At an age when most children are worried about school assignments and weekend activities, he was suddenly facing allegations connected to a fatal stabbing. The enormity of that fact stunned the nation. People struggled to comprehend it. The ages involved seemed impossible. A 16-year-old dead. A 13-year-old accused. The story challenged assumptions about childhood, violence, responsibility, and consequence. In the hours following the incident, police secured the area and recovered the knife. That weapon, silent and inanimate, would become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case. Investigators understood that answers would not emerge from emotion alone. They would emerge from evidence. Witness testimony. Physical evidence. Video footage. Timelines. Forensics. Facts. The search for those facts was only beginning. Yet even before the investigation fully developed, one reality had already become undeniable. A young life had ended. No future discovery could change that. No legal argument could undo it. No courtroom verdict could erase it. The confrontation at Great King Street had lasted only moments. Its consequences would last years. The headlines that followed would focus on charges, legal definitions, and judicial outcomes. But beneath every future development remained the same heartbreaking truth. An ordinary afternoon had become a tragedy. A bus hub had become a crime scene. A student had become a victim. And a few irreversible seconds had altered the lives of everyone connected to them. By the time the first police officers arrived at the Dunedin bus hub, the chaos of the confrontation had already given way to something else. Shock. The kind of shock that settles over a scene when reality begins catching up with everyone present. Only minutes earlier, the area had been filled with the ordinary sounds of a weekday afternoon. Students waiting for transportation. Conversations drifting through the crowd. The constant movement of people making their way home after school. Now, those same spaces felt unfamiliar. People stood in clusters. Some stared silently. Others spoke in hurried whispers. Many were trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Human beings are not designed to process sudden violence easily. The mind searches for explanations. It tries to impose order on events that feel impossible. Witnesses replay moments repeatedly, hoping the second or third viewing inside their memory will reveal something they missed the first time. A detail. A warning sign. A chance to understand how everything changed so quickly. For investigators, however, understanding begins with something far less emotional. The scene. Every homicide investigation starts in the same place. Not with theories. Not with motives. Not with courtroom arguments. It begins with evidence. And evidence is fragile. Every passing minute creates new risks. Foot traffic can alter a scene. Weather can affect physical traces. Witnesses can unintentionally influence one another's recollections. Memories can begin changing almost immediately. The first task facing police was therefore simple in principle, though enormous in importance. Preserve what remained. The bus hub was secured. Officers established boundaries. Areas that had moments earlier functioned as ordinary public space were transformed into part of an active criminal investigation. To the public, crime scenes often appear dramatic because of the visual markers. Police tape. Emergency vehicles. Uniformed officers. Yet what those markers truly represent is uncertainty. A crime scene is not merely a location where something happened. It is a collection of unanswered questions. Questions waiting for evidence to answer them. Questions waiting for witnesses to illuminate them. Questions waiting for investigators to piece together the truth. At Great King Street, those questions were numerous. How exactly had the confrontation started? Who had witnessed the critical moments? What actions occurred immediately before the stabbing? What happened afterward? How many people had been present? Were there recordings? Were there photographs? Could anyone provide a clear timeline? Each answer mattered. Each answer might determine the direction of the investigation. Among the most significant discoveries was the weapon itself. Police recovered the knife used during the incident. In many homicide investigations, locating the weapon becomes a major challenge. Sometimes it disappears. Sometimes it is hidden. Sometimes it is never found at all. In this case, investigators had immediate access to one of the most important pieces of physical evidence. The knife would eventually become central to understanding not only what happened but also how the legal arguments surrounding the case would develop. A weapon tells investigators many things. its size, its condition, its characteristics, its potential lethality, whether it was carried deliberately, whether it was obtained spontaneously, whether its presence suggests planning, preparation, or something else entirely. These are not questions answered in a single moment. They require careful examination. But from the beginning, investigators understood that the knife would occupy a critical place within the story. As forensic specialists moved through the scene, attention focused on preserving every possible detail. Photographs were taken. Measurements were recorded. Evidence was catalogued. Locations were documented with precision. Crime scenes speak a language of their own. To untrained observers, they often appear ordinary. To experienced investigators, they contain information hidden in plain sight. The position of objects. The movement of people. The relationship between different pieces of evidence. Tiny details can become enormously important later. A single observation can support or challenge an entire theory. That is why investigators resist rushing to conclusions. The first version of events is rarely the complete version. Meanwhile, officers began identifying and speaking with witnesses. This process is one of the most challenging aspects of any investigation involving public violence. Witnesses rarely see everything. People focus on different details. Stress affects perception. Adrenaline alters memory. Two individuals standing only a few feet apart can emerge with dramatically different recollections of the same event. This does not necessarily mean either person is dishonest. It simply reflects the complexity of human observation. When violence erupts unexpectedly, the brain prioritizes survival over perfect recording. Some people remember faces. Others remember voices. Some remember movements. Others remember emotions. Investigators must gather all these fragments and determine where they overlap. The process resembles assembling a puzzle without knowing what the final image should look like. At the bus hub, there was no shortage of people who had seen at least some portion of the incident. Students had been present. Members of the public had been nearby. Transportation staff may have observed portions of the event. Each person potentially possessed a small piece of the larger picture. The challenge was determining how those pieces fit together. As statements were collected, investigators began constructing a preliminary timeline. This timeline would become the backbone of the case. Every major investigation depends upon chronology. What happened first? What happened next? Who was present? When did the confrontation begin? How long did it last? When was the weapon produced? What occurred immediately afterward? The answers help transform confusion into structure. Without a timeline, evidence exists only as disconnected fragments. With a timeline, patterns begin emerging. Yet timelines are rarely perfect, especially in cases involving sudden violence. Witnesses estimate. Memories blur. People disagree. Investigators must compare accounts carefully. They search for consistency. They look for corroboration. They identify contradictions. The work is meticulous and often slow. But accuracy matters, because eventually every detail may be examined in court. While investigators worked at the scene, another process was unfolding elsewhere. News of the incident was spreading. At first, information traveled through social circles. Students contacted friends. Parents contacted one another. Rumors moved faster than confirmed facts. This pattern has become increasingly common in the modern world. Before official statements appear, social media often fills the vacuum. Fragments of truth mix with speculation. Questions multiply. Anxiety grows. For families connected to those involved, those early hours can be agonizing. The need for information becomes overwhelming. Yet reliable information remains scarce. Authorities must verify facts before releasing them. Investigations require caution. The public often demands immediate answers. Reality rarely provides them. The death of Enere Tana McLaren transformed what might otherwise have been treated as a serious assault into a homicide inquiry. That distinction changed everything. Resources expanded. Attention intensified. The stakes increased dramatically. A young person had died. The responsibility to determine exactly what happened became even more significant. In cases involving juveniles, investigators face additional complexities. Youth introduces unique legal and ethical considerations. Age affects interviews. Age affects public disclosure. Age affects how information can be released. The fact that the suspect was only 13 years old immediately placed the case into extraordinary territory. Even experienced investigators encounter very few homicide cases involving someone so young. The age factor alone guaranteed public interest. But public interest can create complications. The more attention a case receives, the greater the pressure on investigators. Every decision becomes scrutinized. Every development attracts commentary. Every delay generates questions. Professionals must remain focused despite that pressure. Their task is not to satisfy public curiosity. Their task is to establish facts. As the investigation progressed through its earliest stages, one reality quickly became apparent. This was not a mystery in the traditional sense. Police were not searching for an unknown attacker. The central question was not identity. The central question was circumstances. What exactly happened during those crucial moments? Why did it happen? How should the actions involved be interpreted? These distinctions would later become enormously important, especially once the case entered the courtroom. At the scene itself, however, investigators remained focused on fundamentals. Evidence first. Interpretation later. The discipline may sound simple, but it is essential. Premature assumptions can derail investigations. Good detectives understand that facts must lead conclusions, not the other way around. The recovered knife would undergo examination. Witness statements would be compared. Available footage would be reviewed. Timelines would be refined. Piece by piece, investigators would attempt to reconstruct the final moments leading to Enere's death. Yet even as this work continued, another reality lingered over the entire process. The victim and the accused were both children. That fact altered the emotional landscape of the case in ways difficult to ignore. Most homicide investigations involve adults. Adult conflicts. Adult decisions. Adult consequences. This case felt different. The ages involved created a sense of collective unease. People struggled to reconcile the legal language with the reality it described. Murder charges. Fatal stabbing. Homicide investigation. These terms are usually associated with adults. Here they were connected to school-age teenagers. The contrast felt jarring. Almost surreal. As darkness settled over Dunedin that evening, the bus hub remained a place of investigation rather than transportation. What had once been a routine location had become something else entirely. A scene preserved in photographs. A location marked by evidence tags. A place forever linked to tragedy. For many members of the community, passing through the area would never feel quite the same again. Places absorb memory. A street corner. A building. A bus stop. Most people pass through such locations without thinking about the history beneath their feet. But after a major event, memory attaches itself to geography. The location becomes inseparable from the story. Great King Street would become one of those places. A place where ordinary life collided with extraordinary loss. A place where investigators began the difficult task of separating fact from confusion. A place where the first clues emerged. And a place where the long search for answers truly began. Because despite the evidence collected that day, despite the recovered weapon, despite the growing number of witness accounts, the most important questions remained unresolved. What exactly happened in those final moments? Why had the confrontation escalated so dramatically? And how would the justice system ultimately interpret the actions of a 13-year-old boy who now stood at the center of one of New Zealand's most shocking juvenile homicide cases? Those answers were still waiting. And the investigation was only beginning. In the hours immediately following the fatal stabbing, the investigation appeared deceptively simple. Police knew where the incident had occurred. They had recovered the knife. Witnesses had been present. And the individual alleged to have carried out the stabbing was already known. From a distance, it might have seemed like an open and shut case. But experienced investigators understand a fundamental truth about violent crime. The moment everyone thinks a case is simple is often the moment complexity begins revealing itself. Because criminal investigations are not designed merely to answer who. They must answer how. They must answer why. And perhaps most importantly, they must answer whether the evidence supports a particular legal conclusion. The death of Eneratana McLaren was no longer in dispute. That tragic reality had already been established. What remained uncertain was the sequence of decisions, actions, and circumstances that transformed a confrontation between two teenagers into a homicide. As detectives began assembling the case, they encountered an unusual challenge. This was not a story involving hardened adult offenders. This was not a dispute between organized criminals. This was not a decades-old cold case filled with missing evidence. The central figures were school-aged children. The emotional intensity of adolescence would become inseparable from every aspect of the investigation. Teenagers often experience conflict differently than adults. Perceived disrespect can feel enormous. Embarrassment can feel unbearable. Challenges can feel impossible to ignore. Emotions rise quickly. Perspective arrives slowly. The problem facing investigators was determining where emotion ended and criminal responsibility began. To do that, they needed to reconstruct the confrontation with extraordinary precision. The first major step involved gathering witness statements. Dozens of people had been present at the bus hub. Some witnessed the entire confrontation. Others observed only fragments. Some arrived moments before the stabbing. Others saw only what happened afterward. Each witness represented a potential piece of the puzzle. Yet witness testimony is rarely straightforward. Human memory is not a video recording. People remember selectively. They focus on details that feel important in the moment. Fear alters perception. Stress influences recall. A person may accurately remember one aspect of an event while completely misunderstanding another. Investigators understood this. Their task was not to accept every account at face value. Their task was to identify points of consistency. When multiple witnesses independently describe the same event, confidence increases. When accounts diverge, further scrutiny becomes necessary. Hours turned into days as detectives compared statements. Patterns slowly emerged. Some elements appeared broadly consistent. Others remained contested. And within those contested areas lay the questions that would eventually dominate courtroom proceedings. Who initiated the confrontation? Who escalated it? What level of threat existed immediately before the stabbing? These questions were not merely academic. They carried enormous legal significance. Meanwhile, investigators examined physical evidence recovered from the scene. Unlike human memory, physical evidence possesses a certain neutrality. It cannot exaggerate. It cannot forget. It cannot become influenced by media coverage or public opinion. Physical evidence simply exists. The challenge lies in interpreting it correctly. The knife recovered at the scene quickly became one of the most important objects in the investigation. Its presence immediately raised critical questions. Why was it being carried? For what purpose? Had it been brought intentionally? Had it been concealed? What did its existence reveal about the mindset of the person carrying it? These questions would eventually become central to the prosecution's theory of the case. Investigators also examined available surveillance footage. Modern cities generate vast amounts of video evidence. Public spaces often contain cameras monitoring transportation hubs, businesses, sidewalks, and intersections. When a violent crime occurs, these recordings can become invaluable. Unlike witnesses, cameras do not experience fear. They do not become distracted. They simply record. Of course, video evidence is not always perfect. Camera angles can be limited. Critical moments may occur outside the frame. Resolution may be insufficient to reveal every detail. Yet even incomplete footage can provide crucial context. Investigators spent countless hours reviewing available recordings. Every movement mattered. Every interaction mattered. Every second leading up to the fatal encounter mattered. Slowly, the timeline became clearer. Not complete. Not flawless. But clearer. And as that timeline developed, so did the central challenge facing investigators. This was not a case built entirely around disagreement over what happened. The greater disagreement involved interpretation. The facts themselves would eventually become less controversial than the meaning attached to them. That distinction may sound subtle. In reality, it was enormous. Two people can agree that a stabbing occurred. They can agree about where it occurred. They can agree about who was involved. Yet still disagree fundamentally about responsibility. Was the act intentional? Was it reckless? Was it defensive? Was it excessive? The answers depend not only upon facts but also upon context. Context became the battleground of the investigation. As detectives dug deeper, attention turned toward the relationship between the two teenagers. Understanding violent encounters requires examining what existed before the violence itself. Rarely do such incidents emerge from nothing. There are often prior interactions, prior tensions, prior disputes. Even when those factors do not excuse behavior, they help explain how events unfolded. Investigators explored the circumstances leading up to the confrontation. They examined communications. They spoke with people familiar with the individuals involved. They attempted to understand the broader picture. Not because background determines guilt, but because background helps establish motive, expectation, and intent. The more investigators learned, the more complicated the case appeared. Public discussions often seek simple narratives. Heroes and villains. Victims and monsters. Good and evil. Reality frequently refuses such simplicity, especially when children are involved. As information slowly entered public awareness, community conversations intensified. Parents discussed the case. Teachers discussed the case. Students discussed the case. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. Many focused on the age of the accused. The number itself carried extraordinary weight. 13. The age felt impossible to ignore. Old enough to understand consequences. Yet still unmistakably a child. People struggle to reconcile those realities. How does a 13-year-old become involved in a fatal stabbing? What circumstances produce such an outcome? Was this evidence of a broader social problem? Or was it a unique tragedy born from a specific set of circumstances? The investigation could not answer every philosophical question. Its purpose was narrower. Determine what happened. Establish the evidence. Present the facts. Yet the case naturally generated larger discussions. Youth violence became a recurring theme. So did concerns about weapon carrying among adolescents. For many New Zealanders, the incident challenged deeply held assumptions about safety. The bus hub was not an isolated location. It was a public space. A place associated with routine. The fact that fatal violence occurred there felt deeply unsettling. As weeks passed, detectives continued refining their understanding of the event. Evidence accumulated. Interviews expanded. Expert analysis supplemented witness observations. The investigation grew stronger. But strength does not necessarily eliminate uncertainty. In many criminal cases, uncertainty simply changes form. The early questions had centered on basic facts. The later questions centered on interpretation. And those interpretation questions would eventually become crucial, particularly once legal teams began preparing their arguments. One emerging issue involved the concept of self-defense. Long before the case reached trial, investigators understood this possibility would require careful examination. Self-defense occupies a unique position within criminal law. The act itself may not be disputed. The focus shifts instead to justification. Was force necessary? Was it reasonable? Was the perceived threat genuine? These questions are among the most difficult legal questions any court can address, because they require jurors, judges, and investigators to evaluate decisions made within seconds under conditions of stress and uncertainty. What appears obvious in hindsight may not have appeared obvious in the moment. At the same time, self-defense is not a limitless concept. The law imposes boundaries. The existence of fear alone does not automatically justify every action. Context matters. Proportionality matters. Reasonableness matters. Investigators therefore approached the issue cautiously. They examined witness accounts carefully. They compared statements against physical evidence. They looked for consistency. They looked for contradiction. They looked for anything capable of clarifying what level of threat actually existed before the fatal wound was inflicted. The deeper they looked, the more apparent it became that the case would ultimately hinge upon moments measured in seconds. Not hours. Not days. Seconds. Seconds during which emotions surged. Seconds during which decisions were made. Seconds during which lives changed forever. These tiny fragments of time would later dominate courtroom proceedings. Yet during the investigation phase, they remained unresolved. Detectives could identify evidence. They could establish timelines. They could reconstruct movements. But interpretation would eventually belong to the justice system. Months after the incident, the investigation had transformed chaos into structure. The bus hub was no longer simply the scene of a tragedy. It had become the center of a detailed evidentiary record. Witness statements. Forensic findings. Video analysis. Timelines. Expert opinions. Thousands of individual details woven together into a coherent narrative. At least coherent enough to proceed. Eventually, authorities reached a conclusion. The 13-year-old boy would face a charge of murder. That decision carried enormous significance. A murder charge represents one of the most serious accusations within any legal system. The age of the accused made the situation even more extraordinary. News of the charge intensified public attention. Some people believed the decision reflected the gravity of the outcome. Others questioned how such a young individual should be treated within the justice system. The debates grew louder. The emotions grew stronger. Yet beneath every argument remained the same unresolved reality. A young man was dead. Another young person stood accused. And the search for truth was about to move from the streets of Dunedin into a courtroom. The investigation had answered many questions. But the most important question still awaited judgment. The next stage would place every piece of evidence under a microscope. Every witness would face scrutiny. Every interpretation would be challenged. And the meaning of those few irreversible seconds at the bus hub would finally be tested before a jury. Every major criminal investigation reaches a moment when scattered pieces begin locking together. The endless interviews. The hours of video review. The forensic reports. The witness statements. The timelines covered in notes and annotations. For weeks, sometimes months, these elements exist as separate fragments. Then gradually, almost imperceptibly, a clearer picture begins to emerge. Not necessarily a complete picture. Not necessarily a comfortable picture. But a picture detailed enough to answer the most important question. What really happened? In the case of Enere Tana McLaren, investigators were never searching for an unknown offender. The central challenge had always been understanding the circumstances surrounding the fatal encounter. The breakthrough would not come from discovering a hidden suspect. It would come from determining how the evidence fit together and what story that evidence ultimately told. As detectives continued their work throughout 2024, attention increasingly focused on the crucial seconds leading up to the stabbing. Again and again, investigators returned to those moments. Again and again, they examined witness accounts. Again and again, they compared physical evidence with personal recollections. Because somewhere within those seconds lay the difference between competing interpretations of the case. A murder charge had already been filed. That decision reflected the seriousness of the allegations. But a charge is not a conviction. A charge represents a legal accusation. The burden of proving that accusation remains. To satisfy that burden, investigators and prosecutors needed more than tragedy. They needed evidence capable of explaining intent, behavior, and responsibility. The emerging picture suggested a confrontation that escalated rapidly. The details mattered enormously. Not simply because a life had been lost, but because criminal law often turns on questions of perception. What did the accused believe was happening? What threat, if any, did he perceive? What options were available? What choices did he make? These questions would become the center of the case. As investigators refined the timeline, they gained greater confidence regarding the sequence of events. Witness statements began reinforcing one another. Certain disputed issues narrowed. The broad framework of the confrontation became clearer. The stabbing itself was no longer the mystery. The circumstances surrounding it remained the focus. One particularly significant area of investigation involved the knife. The weapon had been recovered early. Its existence was never disputed. What investigators sought to understand was the role it played in the unfolding confrontation. Weapons possess a psychological significance beyond their physical characteristics. The moment a knife enters a conflict, the nature of that conflict changes. The possibility of fatal injury becomes immediate. A confrontation that might otherwise end with bruises can suddenly end with death. That reality influenced how investigators viewed the events at Great King Street. Evidence suggested that the younger teenager had been carrying the knife before the confrontation reached its final stage. This detail would become one of the most consequential facts in the case. Because it shifted attention toward preparation. Toward decision-making. Toward responsibility. Investigators understood that jurors would eventually ask a fundamental question. Why was the knife there in the first place? The answer to that question would not determine guilt by itself. But it would influence how the broader narrative was understood. Meanwhile, detectives continued interviewing individuals connected to the event. Some conversations produced clarification. Others introduced new complexities. This is common in criminal investigations. Every answer generates additional questions. Every witness provides another perspective. The challenge is determining which perspectives align most closely with reality. As evidence accumulated, prosecutors began preparing for the legal battle ahead. And it was during this stage that the case experienced its most important turning point. Not a dramatic revelation. Not a hidden confession. Not an unexpected forensic discovery. Instead, the breakthrough came through interpretation. The evidence increasingly suggested that the case would revolve around a single issue. Self-defense. The possibility had lingered over the investigation from the beginning. Now it moved to the forefront. The defense position would ultimately argue that the 13-year-old believed he was in danger. That he feared an attack. that his actions occurred within the context of perceived self-preservation. Prosecutors viewed the evidence differently. They believed the confrontation had been escalated by the accused. They argued that carrying and ultimately using the knife transformed the encounter into something unjustifiable. This disagreement would define everything that followed. And it represented the true breakthrough of the investigation. The realization that the case was not fundamentally about identifying what happened. It was about deciding what those actions meant. In many criminal cases, jurors confront disputes about facts. Who was present? Who committed the act? What occurred? This case occupied a more complicated territory. Many of the underlying facts were already established. The challenge involved interpretation, meaning, intent, reasonableness. Those concepts are inherently more difficult to evaluate, especially when viewed through the lens of adolescent behavior. Teenagers rarely think like adults. Their emotional responses differ. Their risk assessments differ. Their understanding of consequences often differs. This reality introduced another layer of complexity. How should the actions of a 13-year-old be evaluated? According to the standards of childhood? According to the standards of adulthood? Or somewhere in between? The justice system would eventually confront those questions directly. But during the investigative phase, prosecutors focused on evidence. What could be proven? What could be demonstrated? What could be supported by testimony and physical findings? The answers shaped the direction of the case. As preparations continued, the community remained deeply invested. Public interest never faded. If anything, it intensified. The age of the accused continued to dominate discussion. Many people found it difficult to reconcile the image of a 13-year-old with the legal language surrounding the case. Murder, homicide, fatal stabbing. These terms seemed incompatible with childhood. Yet the evidence forced society to confront an uncomfortable reality. Youth does not eliminate consequences. Youth does not prevent tragedy. And youth does not make difficult legal questions disappear. For NRA's family, however, public debates about legal classifications existed alongside a much more personal reality. The loss remained unchanged. Regardless of legal interpretation. Regardless of courtroom arguments. Regardless of future verdicts. A 16-year-old son was gone. No breakthrough could alter that fact. No investigative finding could reverse it. The investigation sought answers, not restoration. Restoration was impossible. As the case moved closer to trial, legal teams scrutinized every detail. Witnesses were assessed. Statements were reviewed repeatedly. Potential inconsistencies were examined. Every significant fact would eventually be tested before a jury. The process was exhaustive. Because high-profile homicide cases demand precision, particularly when the consequences are so profound. Investigators understood that defense lawyers would challenge assumptions. They would question interpretations. They would present alternative explanations. This is not a flaw within the justice system. It is one of its essential protections. Truth emerges most reliably when evidence is tested rather than merely accepted. The coming courtroom battle would test everything. Every witness. Every timeline. Every conclusion. And yet, by the end of the investigative phase, authorities possessed confidence in the overall framework of the case. Enough confidence to proceed. Enough confidence to argue that criminal responsibility existed. Enough confidence to place the evidence before a jury. The breakthrough had arrived. Not in the form of a single revelation, but through accumulation. Hundreds of details. Hundreds of observations. Hundreds of hours of work. All converging toward a clearer understanding of what occurred at the bus hub. The confrontation had lasted only moments. The investigation consumed months. That imbalance is common in homicide cases. The act itself may be brief. Understanding it requires far longer. As 2025 approached, attention shifted away from police investigators and toward the courtroom. The evidence was largely gathered. The narratives were forming. The legal strategies were emerging. Soon, 12 jurors would face the task investigators had spent months preparing for. Evaluating the evidence. Interpreting the actions. Determining responsibility. And answering a question that remained emotionally charged from the very beginning. How should the law judge a 13-year-old whose actions ended another teenager's life? The answer would not come from detectives. It would not come from public opinion. It would come from the courtroom. And the courtroom would soon become the stage upon which every piece of evidence, every argument, and every interpretation would collide. The investigation had uncovered the facts. Now the justice system would decide what those facts meant. Courtrooms are often imagined as places where truth emerges cleanly and decisively. The reality is far more complicated. A courtroom cannot travel backward through time. It cannot replay events exactly as they happened. It cannot restore lost lives. What it can do is examine evidence. It can test competing narratives. It can weigh facts against legal standards. And ultimately, it can determine responsibility. Nearly a year after the fatal confrontation at the Dunedin bus hub, the case that had shocked New Zealand entered its next and most scrutinised chapter. The trial. By this stage, the tragedy itself was no longer in question. Everyone agreed on the central fact. Enere Tana McLaren had died from a stab wound sustained during the confrontation on May 23, 2024. The accused, whose identity remained protected because he was a minor, had admitted involvement in the fatal incident. The debate was no longer about whether the stabbing occurred. The debate was about why it occurred, and whether the law would classify that act as murder. From the outside, legal definitions often appear straightforward. In practice, they are anything but. The difference between murder and manslaughter can depend upon intention, state of mind, circumstances, and the interpretation of actions that unfold within mere seconds. Jurors would soon face the daunting responsibility of evaluating those distinctions. Inside the courtroom, two competing narratives began taking shape. Each side examined the same event. Each side relied upon many of the same facts. Yet each arrived at a very different conclusion. The prosecution's position was clear. They argued that the accused had played an active role in escalating the confrontation. They pointed to the presence of the knife. They pointed to decisions made before and during the incident. They argued that the evidence demonstrated criminal responsibility consistent with the murder charge. To prosecutors, the fatal outcome was not simply an unfortunate accident born of fear. It was the result of choices. Choices that carried foreseeable consequences. Choices that ultimately cost a 16-year-old boy his life. Across the courtroom, the defense presented a different interpretation. They did not deny the tragedy. They did not deny the fatal injury. Instead, they focused on fear. Perception. Self-preservation. The defense argued that the 13-year-old believed he faced an immediate threat. That he was confronted by an older, larger teenager. That his actions occurred in the context of perceived danger. The distinction was critical. Because self-defense occupies a unique place within criminal law. The law recognizes that human beings sometimes face situations in which they believe force is necessary to protect themselves. The challenge lies in determining whether that belief was reasonable. Whether the response was proportionate. Whether the circumstances justified the action. Those questions are rarely easy. They become even more difficult when the person making the decision is only 13 years old. As witness testimony unfolded, jurors were asked to revisit the events of May 23 in extraordinary detail. Minute by minute. Moment by moment. Each witness offered a perspective. Each account added texture to the larger picture. no single witness possessed every answer. No individual observed every detail. Instead, the jury was presented with fragments. Pieces of a larger puzzle. A confrontation. Escalation. A knife. A fatal wound. The challenge was transforming those fragments into understanding. Trials involving young defendants often generate a unique emotional atmosphere. The accused sat at the center of proceedings not as a hardened adult offender but as a teenager. A child, in many respects. Yet simultaneously a person accused of causing the death of another child. That duality was impossible to ignore. Observers confronted two difficult truths at once. A family had lost a son. Another family watched a child face one of the most serious accusations imaginable. The tragedy extended in multiple directions. As evidence was presented, the issue of the knife remained central. Its existence carried enormous weight. The prosecution emphasized that the weapon had been carried and concealed. The defense focused on the circumstances under which it was ultimately used. These differing interpretations reflected the broader conflict at the heart of the trial. Was the fatal act primarily the product of aggression? Or fear? The answer would shape everything. Court proceedings often appear dramatic in television portrayals. Real trials tend to be slower. More methodical. Less theatrical. Lawyers ask questions. Witnesses answer. Documents are examined. Evidence is introduced. Legal arguments unfold piece by piece. Days become weeks. Complexity replaces simplicity. And slowly, jurors accumulate enough information to begin forming judgments. The jury in this case faced an especially difficult task. Human behavior rarely fits neatly into categories. Fear and aggression can coexist. Impulsivity can intersect with intention. People can make terrible decisions without fully understanding the consequences. The law nonetheless requires conclusions. Jurors cannot respond with uncertainty alone. Eventually they must decide. As closing arguments approached, both sides attempted to guide jurors toward their respective interpretations. The prosecution emphasized accountability. The defense emphasized perceived threat. The prosecution highlighted actions that suggested escalation. The defense highlighted circumstances they believed supported self-defense. At its core, the case revolved around a question that has challenged legal systems for centuries. How should society judge actions taken during moments of fear and conflict? Particularly when those actions produce irreversible consequences. Once the arguments concluded, responsibility shifted entirely to the jury. The lawyers could say no more. The witnesses could provide no further testimony. The investigators could offer no additional evidence. Now came deliberation. The private process through which jurors discuss facts, challenge assumptions, and attempt to reach a unanimous conclusion. Deliberations are among the least visible yet most important stages of any criminal trial. The public sees the verdict. The public rarely sees the intellectual and emotional journey required to reach it. Jurors must navigate competing interpretations. They must evaluate credibility. They must separate emotion from legal analysis. The responsibility can feel immense. Particularly in cases involving death. Particularly in cases involving children. Eventually, the jury reached its decision. The verdict surprised some observers. The accused was found not guilty of murder. But the jury did not acquit him entirely. Instead, they found him guilty of manslaughter. The distinction mattered enormously. Legally. Morally. Emotionally. The verdict reflected a conclusion that while the prosecution had not proven murder beyond a reasonable doubt, criminal responsibility for Enri's death nevertheless existed. The outcome illustrated the complexity that had defined the case from the beginning. The jury rejected the most serious charge. Yet they also rejected complete exoneration. The result occupied a space between the competing narratives. A space acknowledging tragedy, accountability, and complexity simultaneously. For some people, the verdict felt appropriate. For others, it did not. That is often the nature of high-profile criminal cases. Legal outcomes rarely satisfy everyone. Different individuals bring different expectations into the courtroom. Different experiences. Different beliefs about justice. The verdict marked the end of one chapter. But another remained. Sentencing. Conviction establishes responsibility. Sentencing determines consequences. Months later, in July 2025, the court confronted the difficult task of deciding punishment. The accused was now 14 years old. Still extraordinarily young. Yet standing before the court as a convicted offender in a fatal stabbing case. Sentencing hearings differ from trials. The focus shifts. The question is no longer whether the defendant committed the offense. The question becomes how society should respond. Judges must weigh competing factors. Aggravating circumstances. Mitigating circumstances. Public safety. Accountability. Rehabilitation. Age. Future prospects. The process is complex, particularly when youth is involved. The sentencing judge examined the facts carefully. Several aggravating factors were identified. The knife had been carried and concealed. The victim had been unarmed. And importantly, the court found no evidence that the accused faced a threat to his life at the moment the fatal blow was delivered. These findings carried significant weight. They shaped the court's understanding of responsibility. At the same time, the defendant's age remained impossible to ignore. 14 years old. An age associated with school, adolescence, and development. Not prison sentences. Not homicide convictions. Balancing those realities presented an enormous challenge. Ultimately, the court imposed a sentence of 3 years and 3 months of imprisonment. The decision represented the legal system's final judgment regarding the case. For some observers, the sentence appeared too severe. For others, too lenient. Such disagreements are common. Justice is rarely a concept upon which everyone agrees. Yet regardless of individual opinions, the legal process had reached its conclusion. The investigation had ended. The trial had ended. The sentencing phase had ended. The case had traveled through every major stage of the justice system. From crime scene to courtroom. From uncertainty to verdict. From accusation to conviction. And still, one uncomfortable truth remained. No outcome could truly be described as a victory. There were no winners. No celebrations. No restored futures. A 16-year-old boy remained dead. A 14-year-old boy began serving a prison sentence. 2 families carried burdens they would likely bear for the rest of their lives. The legal system had delivered its judgment. The law had spoken. But law and healing are not the same thing. Justice may provide accountability. It cannot erase grief. It cannot undo a fatal decision. It cannot return a child to his parents. And it cannot fully answer the question that haunted the case from the beginning. How did a conflict between 2 teenagers end in such devastating loss? The courtroom had provided a legal answer. The emotional answer remained far more elusive. And perhaps it always would. Because some tragedies resist complete understanding. They leave behind verdicts. They leave behind records. They leave behind sentences. But they also leave behind something else. A lingering sense of sorrow for what might have been. For the life that ended. For the lives forever changed. And for the realization that a few seconds of violence can create consequences that endure long after the courtroom doors finally close. When a criminal case ends in court, it often feels as though a chapter of history has closed. The verdict is delivered. The sentence is given. The legal system moves on to other cases. But for the people who lived inside the story, there is no sense of closure that arrives with the judge's final words. For them, the aftermath is not an ending. It is a continuation of everything that came before, except now without the possibility of reversal. In Dunedin, life did what life always does after tragedy. It kept moving. Buses still arrived at the Great King Street hub. Students still gathered after school. People still crossed paths at the same intersections. But something fundamental had changed in the way that place existed in memory. Certain locations absorb events in a way that cannot be undone. A bus stop is no longer just a bus stop after violence occurs there. It becomes a reference point. A reminder. A place where two timelines of a city split apart. Before and after. For N.R.A. Tana McLaren's family, the aftermath is measured not in court dates or legal milestones, but in absence. Absence that repeats itself in daily life. Absence that refuses to soften with time in any predictable way. There is the absence of ordinary routines that once felt insignificant. Messages that will never arrive again. Conversations that end permanently in memory. Future milestones that exist only as imagination. Birthdays that now carry a different weight. Holidays that feel altered. The passage of time does not erase these absences. It simply forces people to learn how to live alongside them. Grief, especially sudden grief, does not follow a straight path. It circles. It returns. It shifts form without disappearing. Some days it is sharp and immediate. Other days it is quiet but persistent. And sometimes it arrives without warning in the middle of ordinary moments, triggered by something as simple as a place, a sound, or a passing thought. For the wider community, the aftermath takes a different shape. There is reflection. There is discomfort. There is conversation about youth violence, safety, and responsibility. People ask how such an event could happen in a public space filled with students. Parents begin paying closer attention to where their children go after school. Schools reinforce messages about conflict and consequences. Authorities discuss prevention and intervention. But even with all this discussion, the central tension of the case does not disappear. Because the facts remain difficult to fully reconcile. A 16-year-old lost his life. A 13-year-old carried a knife into a confrontation that ended in fatal violence. A jury concluded manslaughter rather than murder. A judge imposed a custodial sentence. Each of these facts is clear on paper. Yet emotionally, they resist simple interpretation. They force people to confront uncomfortable questions about adolescence, accountability, and the limits of understanding human behavior in moments of crisis. The legal process provides structure. It assigns responsibility within defined boundaries. But society often demands something more than structure. It seeks meaning. And meaning is far harder to define. In the months following the sentencing, public attention gradually decreased. News coverage moved on to other events. The courtroom emptied. The formal processes concluded. But the impact of the case continued quietly in the background of many lives. For those directly involved, there is no return to normal. There is only adaptation. Learning how to exist in a world that contains a permanent rupture. For N.R.A.'s friends, memory becomes a form of preservation. They remember conversations that will not be repeated. They remember laughter that no longer has a source. They remember a presence that once filled shared spaces. Over time, these memories become more precious, but also more painful. Because memory preserves what reality has taken away. For the young person convicted in the case, the aftermath is shaped by confinement, reflection, and the long process of legal consequence. The justice system emphasizes rehabilitation for youth offenders, recognizing that adolescence is a period of development rather than fixed identity. But rehabilitation does not erase responsibility. It does not undo harm. It does not restore what was lost. It exists alongside consequences, not in place of them. The case also continues to sit within a broader national conversation. New Zealand, like many countries, continues to grapple with questions about youth violence and weapon carrying among teenagers. There are debates about prevention, about early intervention, about social pressures affecting young people, about the environments in which conflict escalates. But cases like this resist simple solutions. They remind people that violence often emerges from complex intersections of emotion, circumstance, and choice. Not from a single cause. Not from a single failure. But from a chain of events that unfolds in real time, often without clear warning. The bus hub itself continues to operate as part of daily life in Dunedin. Yet its meaning has permanently changed for those who know its history. Every public space that becomes associated with tragedy carries that dual identity. Function and memory existing side by side. Most people who pass through will not think about what happened there. But for others, the location will always hold a different weight. A reminder that ordinary environments can become the setting for extraordinary consequences in an instant. Time has a way of softening headlines. What once felt immediate becomes distant in public consciousness. But time does not soften the reality of loss for those who experienced it directly. It only teaches them how to carry it differently. The story of Enere Tana McLaren does not end with the verdict. It does not end with the sentence. It does not end with media coverage fading away. It continues in memory, in grief, in reflection, and in the ongoing lives of everyone connected to the event. True crime narratives often focus heavily on the moment of violence. The confrontation, the investigation, the trial. But the aftermath is where the deepest human impact lies. It is where the absence becomes permanent. Where the consequences extend beyond legal definitions. Where families and communities learn how to exist after something unthinkable has occurred. There are no final answers that fully resolve the emotional weight of this case. The legal system has provided its judgment. But judgment is not the same as understanding. And understanding is not the same as healing. What remains is a collection of truths that exist side by side, even when they feel difficult to reconcile. A young life was lost. A young life was altered. A community was changed. And a moment of conflict became a lasting reminder of how quickly ordinary life can fracture. Dunedin continues forward, as all cities do. But it carries within it a memory that cannot be separated from its streets, its bus stops, and its everyday rhythms. Because somewhere in the flow of daily movement, beneath the ordinary sounds of a functioning city, there is a reminder that everything can change in seconds. And once it does, nothing returns to what it was before. Only the memory remains. And the people who must learn to live with it. When a case like this reaches its conclusion in the legal system, people often expect a sense of resolution to follow. A final explanation. A final moral. A clear division between right and wrong that settles everything into place. But some stories refuse to settle. They linger instead, not because the facts are unclear, but because the meaning of those facts resists simplicity. The Dunedin bus hub case is one of those stories. On paper, the timeline is established. A confrontation between two teenagers. An escalation. A knife introduced into the moment. A fatal injury. An investigation. A trial. A verdict of manslaughter. A custodial sentence. Each step is documented. Each step is recorded within the structure of the justice system. And yet, none of those steps fully explain how a normal afternoon in a student-filled city became a moment of irreversible loss. That gap between explanation and understanding is where reflection begins. Because beyond the legal outcome, there is a more difficult question that continues to echo long after the courtroom has gone quiet. How do we make sense of a tragedy involving children on both sides of it? There is no comfortable answer. Only layers of reality that sit uneasily together. A 16-year-old who did not come home. A 13-year-old whose actions led to a criminal conviction. Families connected by a single event that neither chose and none can escape. Communities often try to reduce such cases into lessons. Warnings about violence. Warnings about weapons. Warnings about conflict escalation. Those lessons matter. But they do not capture the full human complexity of what occurred. Because behind every lesson are individuals who lived through something far more chaotic than any simplified message can contain. Adolescence itself sits at the center of this tragedy in a way that cannot be ignored. It is a stage of life defined by transition. Between childhood and adulthood. Between dependence and independence. Between emotional impulse and developing judgment. Most young people navigate this period without becoming involved in anything remotely close to violence. But the Jundin case forces attention onto the rare moments when emotional intensity, situational pressure, and poor decisions converge with irreversible consequences. It is in those moments that society is confronted with its most uncomfortable truths about youth behavior. Not because youth is inherently dangerous, but because youth is inherently vulnerable to circumstances it does not yet fully understand. The justice system attempted to respond to those circumstances within the boundaries of law. It recognized responsibility. It recognized age. It recognized context. It reached a verdict that reflected a balance between competing interpretations of the evidence. But legal balance does not translate into emotional balance. For those who lost someone, no verdict can restore equilibrium. For those who must live with the consequences of their actions, no sentence can erase the reality of what happened. This is the enduring tension at the heart of the case. Justice can assign responsibility. It cannot rewrite outcomes. As time moves forward, public attention inevitably fades. New events replace old headlines. New cases occupy space in public discussion. But for the people directly connected to this story, time behaves differently. It does not replace. It accumulates. Each day adds another layer of absence or consequence. Each year moves life further away from the moment that changed everything. And yet the memory of that moment does not diminish in the same way. It remains fixed. A reference point that divides life into before and after. For Jundin itself, the case becomes part of its history. Not in a way that defines the city, but in a way that exists beneath its surface. A reminder that even familiar places carry unpredictable potential for tragedy. A reminder that public spaces are shaped not only by their function, but by the events that occur within them. A reminder that safety is something people assume until it is disrupted. And once disrupted, it cannot be experienced in quite the same way again. The bus hub continues to operate. Students continue to pass through it. Life continues in its ordinary rhythm. But memory does not require constant visibility to persist. It remains in the background. Quiet but present. For those who know the story, Great King Street will never be just another location. It will always contain echoes of an afternoon when ordinary movement turned into something far more serious. Something that began in seconds and extended into years of consequence. In reflecting on this case, it is easy to focus on the moment of violence. That moment is what the legal system must examine. It is what investigations reconstruct. It is what trials debate. But reflection requires widening the lens. Because what surrounds that moment matters just as much. The environment. The emotions. The decisions leading up to it. The choices that followed it. The lives that continued after it. And the lives that did not. True crime often seeks closure. A final explanation that ties everything together neatly. But some cases resist closure because human experience itself is rarely neat. It is layered. Contradictory. Incomplete. The Jundin bus hub case does not offer a simple moral conclusion. Instead, it offers something more difficult. A reminder that moments of conflict can escalate faster than anyone expects. That youth does not prevent tragedy. That perception and reality can diverge in ways that shape legal outcomes. And that consequences, once set in motion, extend far beyond the instant they begin. In the end, what remains is not resolution. It is awareness. Awareness of how fragile ordinary life can be. Awareness of how quickly situations can change direction. Awareness of how deeply a single event can affect multiple lives in different ways. An awareness that behind every case file, every verdict, and every headline, there are human beings carrying experiences that do not end when the story stops being told. The Jundin case will be remembered for the questions it raised as much as the answers it provided. Questions about responsibility. Questions about youth. Questions about violence. Questions about how communities understand and respond to moments that defy easy explanation. And perhaps most importantly, it will be remembered for the lives it touched in ways that cannot be undone. Because long after the court proceedings are finished and the public attention has moved elsewhere, the reality remains unchanged. A teenager went to a bus stop and did not return home. Another teenager left that same moment carrying consequences that will follow for years. And a city learned, once again, that even the most ordinary places can become the setting for events that change everything. There is no final line that resolves that truth. Only the continuing passage of time. And the quiet persistence of memory, holding together everything that cannot be repaired.